Imagine coming home from a peaceful trip only to find your house reduced to rubble, without warning, without notice. That's exactly what happened to me. But here's the twist. The entire demolition was caught in real time by my drone, streaming live, directly to the police. I had been looking forward to this trip for months, a much-needed break from the constant noise and stress of everyday life. The weather was perfect, the air was fresh, and I finally felt like I could relax without constantly checking my phone or worrying about what might be happening back home. My neighborhood had always been fairly quiet, the kind of place where you expected things to look exactly the same when you returned as when you left. I locked up my house, double-checked the doors and windows, and left knowing everything was in order. There was no indication whatsoever that anything unusual was about to happen. No hint of a problem brewing in the background. My house stood there solid, familiar, and secure, the result of years of hard work and countless memories. It was more than just a structure. It was my safe place, my personal space where I felt completely in control. The trip itself had been exactly what I needed. I explored new places, met interesting people, and caught up on sleep I'd been missing for months. I didn't check my emails or messages obsessively, assuming that if something important came up, someone would call. My neighbors weren't the type to stir up trouble, and as far as I knew, the HOA had no issues with me or my property. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn neat, and followed the rules as they were written. There had been no letters, no warnings, no complaints lodged against me, at least none that I was aware of. That's why, when I pulled into my street after days away, I expected to see my home waiting for me just as I had left it, maybe with a little more dust on the porch or a few leaves scattered in the yard. Instead, my breath caught in my throat the moment I turned the corner. Where my home should have been, there was only a flattened stretch of dirt, scattered debris, and a cloud of dust that still hung faintly in the air. My car rolled to a slow stop as I tried to process what I was looking at. The familiar shape of my house was gone. The garden I'd planted by hand, the porch swing where I'd sat on quiet evenings, the windows that caught the morning light, gone. In their place was the hollow, raw sight of destruction, as if a storm had swept through and erased everything. But there had been no storm. The weather had been calm the entire time I was away. This wasn't nature's doing. My mind raced, flipping through possible explanations. Fire? No, there were no burn marks, no scent of smoke in the air. Accident? It was too precise for that. The way the ground was leveled and the debris piled neatly to one side looked intentional, controlled. And then the truth began to dawn on me, though it made no sense at all. Someone had demolished my house. Not partially, not accidentally, completely. I stepped out of the car in a daze, my shoes crunching over the dirt and shards of broken material, and every step felt heavier than the last. The reality that this wasn't a nightmare but something that had actually happened was starting to settle in, and with it came a rising wave of anger, confusion, and disbelief. I had no warning, no call, no email, no letter slipped under my door. There had been no legal notice posted on the property, nothing to suggest that I should expect anything other than a quiet, untouched home when I returned. The place I had invested so much time, effort, and money into had been erased while I was blissfully unaware hundreds of miles away. I could almost hear the echoes of my life there. The laughter during get-togethers, the quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, the sound of rain against the roof. All of it silenced in an instant. And as I stood there, staring at the emptiness, the only thought running through my mind was how something like this could happen without me knowing, and what kind of authority believed they had the right to make it happen at all. In all my years of living in that neighborhood, I had never once been given a reason to think the HOA might have a problem with me or my property. I had always followed their guidelines to the letter, keeping my lawn neatly trimmed, my paint fresh, and my driveway clear of clutter. I wasn't the type to host loud parties or let my home fall into disrepair. If anything, I thought I was exactly the kind of resident the HOA would appreciate. That's why it was so baffling to realize that something as extreme as the demolition of my house had happened without a single prior notice or even the smallest attempt at communication. I hadn't received so much as a knock on the door or a letter in the mailbox hinting at any sort of violation. In the weeks before my trip, there had been no official meetings where my property was discussed, No agenda items mentioning my address, and certainly no mention of any action that would result in the removal of my home. I began mentally retracing my steps before leaving for my trip, trying to remember if there had been any small hints I had overlooked. An unusual letter, a phone call I had missed, a neighbor making a strange comment. But nothing came to mind. The days before my departure had been normal and uneventful. I went through my usual routine, paid my bills, even waved at the HOA president as I saw her walking her dog one morning. She didn't say a single word about anything being wrong, and I had no reason to think she was hiding something. If there had been an issue serious enough to warrant such an extreme action, surely they would have contacted me directly. That's not just common courtesy. It's basic procedure. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. HOAs are supposed to operate under a strict set of rules and legal guidelines. If a resident is in violation of any covenant, the process typically starts with a written notice. That's followed by an opportunity to correct the issue, and if that doesn't happen, there are hearings or fines. Demolition is not the kind of action that just happens out of nowhere. It's a last resort measure taken only in the most extreme circumstances, and even then, it requires extensive legal justification. Yet here I was, standing on an empty lot where my home used to be, with no paper trail, no signed forms, no documentation, nothing. It was impossible to ignore how deliberate this silence had been. The HOA had every opportunity to reach me. I wasn't hard to contact. My phone number, email address, and mailing address were all on file. They knew where I lived, and they knew when I would be out of town because I had submitted a temporary leave notice for security purposes, something they encourage residents to do when they travel. That meant they were fully aware of my absence, and that knowledge seemed to have played a part in whatever decision they made. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. They acted when they knew I would be gone, when I couldn't step in to stop it or even question what they were doing. I imagined the process of planning this out, the meetings, the conversations, the permits, if any were even obtained, all happening behind closed doors with no input from me. It was a chilling thought, realizing that people I saw regularly and greeted politely could have been making arrangements to destroy my home without ever speaking to me about it. This wasn't just a lack of communication. It felt calculated, as though they had intentionally kept me in the dark, standing in the middle of what was once my property. I kept thinking about how absurd it was that the first time I was made aware of any problem was after the damage was already done. No warning signs, no legal postings, no chance to defend myself or my home. Just the crushing reality of coming back to nothing. That absence of communication wasn't just negligence. It was the core reason I was now left staring at a pile of rubble where my life used to be. Before leaving for my trip, one of the last things I did was set my security drone to patrol mode. It wasn't something I always did, but because I was going to be away for several days, I wanted the extra layer of protection. The drone wasn't just for recording. It was equipped with an automated flight schedule, a live streaming camera, and motion detection. It could fly around the perimeter of my property, hover at specific points, and return to its charging dock on its own. I'd invested in it after a few minor incidents in the neighborhood, nothing serious, but enough to make me think that keeping an eye on things remotely might be worth it. The system was reliable, discreet, and something I thought I'd only ever need for minor security concerns, like package theft or suspicious cars driving by. The drone had its own built-in memory and could store hours of footage, which I could access anytime from my phone or laptop. It also had a cloud backup, meaning even if the physical drone was damaged or stolen, the recordings would still be saved online. This feature gave me peace of mind as I locked up my home and headed out. I didn't expect anything dramatic to happen, but I liked knowing that, just in case, there was a silent witness keeping watch. It wasn't unusual for me to leave the drone running while I was gone, but this time, I had also set it to operate more frequently than usual. Normally, it would do a sweep twice a day, once in the morning and once at night, but for this trip, I increased its patrols to every few hours. The reasoning was simple. I wanted to capture as much as possible, so I wouldn't miss anything important. I thought the most I'd see would be a few stray animals wandering into the yard or the wind rustling through the trees. The idea that it would end up recording the complete destruction of my home never even crossed my mind. The system was smart enough to detect unusual activity. If something moved in an area it wasn't supposed to, the drone would adjust its position, zoom in, and keep the object in frame until the activity stopped. It didn't matter if it was a person, a vehicle, or construction equipment. The camera would follow it. Because it was so quiet in operation, most people wouldn't even notice it was there unless they were looking for it. As I think back, I realized that setting up that drone was probably the most important decision I made before leaving. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my closest neighbors. To me, it was just another part of my security setup, like locking the doors or setting the alarm system. Nobody needed to know about it, and the HOA certainly didn't. This secrecy meant that, when the demolition began, no one involved had any idea they were being recorded from multiple angles in crystal clear quality. I imagine the moment it happened. The drone starting its scheduled patrol, the motors whirring softly as it lifted off from the dock, and the camera automatically adjusting to the sunlight. It would have flown its usual route at first, capturing the front yard, the driveway, and the street. Then, as soon as heavy machinery arrived, the motion sensors would have triggered the camera to focus in, following every move. The wide lens would have caught the entire scene. The trucks pulling up, the crew stepping out, the equipment being positioned. Every single detail would have been stored, second by second, without anyone realizing it. The irony is that I didn't even check the drone feed while I was away. I trusted my home was safe and saw no reason to look in on it. It wasn't until I came back and pieced together what happened that I realized the drone had been my silent witness the whole time. The fact that it had been running continuously, capturing everything from the arrival of the demolition team to the final moments when the last wall came down, was something I couldn't have planned better if I'd tried. When the demolition began, the drone's sensors picked up the movement almost instantly. It was mid-morning, the sun casting sharp shadows across the yard, when a large truck pulled up in front of my property. The drone, following its programmed patrol path, shifted its camera and locked onto the vehicle. Its motors hummed softly as it hovered in place, zooming in to capture the details. The logo on the truck door, the equipment in the back, the crew stepping out with hard hats and reflective vests. None of them seemed to notice the small device silently recording from above. As they moved onto my property, the drone's algorithm detected the increased activity and adjusted its position, gliding to a higher vantage point for a better view. It caught every motion in clear, high-definition video. The workers walking across my lawn, carrying tools, unloading machinery. A backhoe was driven into position, its engine rumbling as it prepared to make its first move. The sound was faint on the drone's microphone, but the visual was unmistakable. My house, still intact, about to face an irreversible blow. The camera caught the exact moment the metal arm swung forward, crashing into the side of the house with brutal force. A cloud of dust billowed into the air, swirling around the site as debris scattered. The drone stayed steady, its stabilizers keeping the footage sharp and level despite the wind and vibrations from the machinery. Piece by piece, wall by wall, the home I had lived in for years was reduced to splintered wood, shattered glass, and broken bricks. From its aerial view, the drone tracked the methodical dismantling of the structure. It followed the movement of the heavy equipment as it tore through the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, spaces once filled with laughter, warmth, and memories now crumbling into lifeless rubble. Every pass of the backhoe's arm, every thud of collapsing wood, every worker hauling away debris was preserved in perfect detail. What made the footage so striking was how clearly it revealed the deliberate nature of the act. This wasn't an emergency response to a hazard. There was no rush, no chaos, no visible signs that this was an unplanned event. The crew moved with calm precision, as though they were following a schedule. There was no hesitation, no attempt to contact me, no pause to verify they were at the right property. The footage showed them working for hours, methodically tearing down every part of my home until nothing remained standing. At certain points, the drone repositioned itself to capture different angles, one moment hovering directly above the demolition, the next drifting to the side to get a clear shot of the equipment operators and the supervisors standing by. Faces were clearly visible, clothing details recognizable, and license plates readable. Even the smallest movements, a worker wiping sweat from his brow, another pointing toward a section of wall, were captured with crystal clarity. The sound, though distant, picked up enough to make out voices and the constant mechanical noise. There was no indication of urgency or distress in their tones. They weren't here to fix something or to handle a crisis. They were here to finish a job. At one point, the footage even caught one of them laughing as a section of the roof collapsed more dramatically than expected. That moment, captured in the middle of what to me was devastation, spoke volumes about the mindset of those carrying out the work. By the time the demolition was complete, the drone had logged hours of footage, cycling between its main battery and a backup power system so it could keep recording without interruption. It documented the cleanup process too. Debris being sorted into piles, some materials being loaded into trucks, others left scattered. Eventually, the equipment was packed up, the workers left, and the property was nothing but a leveled patch of earth surrounded by silence. All of this played out under the unblinking eye of my drone, a mechanical witness hovering above the scene, preserving every second for the moment I would discover what had been done. The fact that no one involved looked up, noticed it, or thought to question it meant they had no idea their actions were being documented in real time from start to finish. The drone system I had invested in wasn't just for local recording. It was connected to a secure cloud platform with an automatic streaming feature tied into an alert system. When the sensors detected a certain level of unusual activity on my property, it triggered a protocol I had set up months earlier but never expected to use. This protocol not only began storing the footage in multiple backups but also initiated a live feed directly to my private security account, which was linked to local law enforcement. I had arranged this feature through a community safety program that allowed verified residents to share real-time surveillance with the police if a serious event was unfolding. At the time, I thought it was something I might use in case of a break-in or vandalism, never imagining it would capture my entire home being systematically destroyed. As soon as the demolition began and the heavy machinery crossed onto my property, the drone recognized the movement pattern as outside the norm. Its AI flagged the event as a priority incident and initiated the live stream. On the other end, in the police department's monitoring center, an automated alert appeared with my address, contact details, and the live video feed. The system was designed to make it possible for officers to observe a developing situation before anyone even made a 911 call. This meant that while I was hundreds of miles away, the local authorities were already watching what was happening on my property in real time. The stream captured everything as it unfolded. The trucks arriving, the crew unloading, the first impact of the demolition equipment against my walls. The high-definition video and multiple angles from the drone made it impossible to misinterpret what was happening. From their vantage point, the police could see that this was not a minor incident but a full-scale teardown of an occupied property. Something that, under normal circumstances, would require legal authorization and owner consent. The feed didn't cut out, didn't glitch, and didn't lose quality. It was as clear as watching a live news broadcast, with the drone automatically adjusting its position to keep the main action in view. If a worker stepped away, the drone would shift slightly to track them. If the equipment moved, it repositioned to maintain a steady frame. It even zoomed in occasionally, providing close-up shots that revealed faces, identifying marks, and company logos on clothing and machinery. All of this was streamed instantly with no delay to both my private security dashboard and the police system. The irony was that, while the people on the ground went about their work as if no one was watching, there were in fact multiple people watching, in a police operations room, in a security monitoring center, and later through recorded backups. The officers observing the scene would have seen every wall brought down, every piece of furniture crushed, and every worker carrying debris out to the trucks. They would have also seen how deliberate and calm the entire process was, lacking any sense of urgency that might suggest it was an emergency demolition for safety reasons. This live stream meant that, from the moment the demolition began until the last piece of debris was removed, the police had a front-row seat to everything. Whether they acted immediately or not, the evidence was already in their hands. The system didn't just rely on human operators either. It generated an automatic incident report that included the timestamps, GPS coordinates, and a summary of detected activity, all attached to the recorded footage. This ensured there was no possibility of the event being lost, deleted, or overlooked. The knowledge that my home's destruction had been transmitted live to the authorities without any effort on my part was both shocking and strangely satisfying. Shocking because I hadn't been aware it was happening at the time, and satisfying because it meant the people responsible couldn't hide behind ignorance or claim there was no record of what they had done. While I was still blissfully unaware on my trip, thinking my house was safe, the police had already seen the very moment the first blow was struck, the dust clouds rising and the walls collapsing. Every single detail was captured and preserved, not just for me, but for the law. When I finally confronted the HOA about what had happened, I expected them to at least show some sign of hesitation, guilt, or even confusion. Instead, what I was met with was an awkward mix of denial and visible shock that quickly gave way to defensive posturing. At first, they seemed confident, almost smug, as if they believed they could justify everything with a few lines from their rulebook. They started to mention vague violations and safety concerns without providing any specifics or documentation. Their tone suggested they thought they could control the narrative and that I would have no choice but to accept whatever excuse they gave. That confidence began to falter, however, the moment I mentioned that the entire demolition had been recorded from start to finish. It was clear from their expressions that they assumed I was talking about standard home security cameras, the kind that might capture a few grainy clips from a fixed angle. They probably believed they could dismiss that sort of evidence as incomplete or inconclusive. But then I clarified, not only had my security drone captured every second of their actions in high definition, but the footage had also been streamed live to the police department in real time. That was when their faces changed completely. The air in the room seemed to shift as the weight of what I was saying settled in. Some of them tried to keep a straight face, but it was obvious they were processing the implications. Others exchanged quick glances, the kind that communicate panic without a word being spoken. A few shifted in their seats, suddenly uncomfortable under the realization that there was no plausible way to deny what had happened. They couldn't claim it was a misunderstanding, they couldn't pretend it was authorized, and they couldn't argue that I was fabricating details. Every move they had made, every person involved, every piece of equipment, and every moment of destruction had been documented from multiple angles. One board member attempted to recover by asking to review the footage, as though this were some kind of friendly dispute that could be resolved over a polite exchange of evidence. But I knew that wasn't what they wanted. They weren't asking to review it for clarity. They were fishing for a way to contain the damage. The mere fact that I had proof was already enough to undermine whatever internal story they had prepared to protect themselves. The longer the conversation went on, the more their usual authoritative tone began to crumble. They weren't barking out HOA bylaws anymore. They were carefully choosing their words, avoiding anything that could be interpreted as an admission of guilt. One even went so far as to suggest that perhaps an outside contractor had acted without proper authorization, a thin attempt to distance the HOA from direct responsibility. But the footage had already captured not only the contractor's work but also individuals known to be HOA representatives present during the demolition. What struck me most was how completely unprepared they were for the idea that their actions might have been monitored in such detail. It was as though they operated under the assumption that, once I returned to a pile of rubble, it would be my word against theirs. They likely believed that without clear proof, I would be buried in months of bureaucratic delays, legal loopholes, and he-said-she-said arguments. The drone footage and the fact that it was streamed live to law enforcement shattered that assumption in an instant. In that moment, their reaction told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't expected to be caught, and they certainly hadn't expected the evidence to be undeniable. The way they avoided eye contact, the way their initial arrogance gave way to nervous fidgeting, and the way they abruptly shifted the subject all pointed to one thing. They knew they were in serious trouble. The HOA that had once carried itself with untouchable authority was suddenly scrambling to figure out how to handle a situation they could no longer control. And it was all because a small, silent drone had been watching them the entire time.